Hi, this is Crystal Veronie, and today I'll be presenting on hybridizing the classroom, considerations from disability perspectives. Throughout the past 4 years, composition instructors have variously responded to the sudden demands of the COVID-19 global pandemic. Initially, a variety of pragmatic methods that engage digital technologies such as Zoom and Microsoft Teams emerged to address the demand for vastly expanded distance education. In the spring of 2021, I was a PhD candidate and teaching Introduction to Literature at a state residential high school for high achieving students. My classes incorporated small cohorts of face-to-face students with synchronous online students. To facilitate positive interactions across the digital divide, the courses utilized telecommunication technology, a 360-degree camera to transmit face-to-face exchanges with the online students, and the projection of Zoom participants on the classroom overhead to promote camaraderie between the face-to-face students and the online cohort. While alternately challenging and satisfying, my experience was not so different from that of most other composition instructors in higher education. Or, as Jennifer Shepard has recognized, much of what developed from the pandemic spring 2020 was, quote, not the careful deliberative work normally required to design online teaching and learning. Rather, that first spring was marked by rapid adaptation, often so hurried that little time was left for careful reflection on pedagogy. Of additional concern is that teachers since the spring of 2020 have rapidly hybridized traditional face-to-face classrooms with technologies familiarized by the crisis period of 2020 to 2022. Undoubtedly, such technological methods provide advantages in bridging distances and expanding access for many students. They are not without drawbacks when adapted to face-to-face classroom modalities, however. Many instructors, myself included, have incorporated Google Docs as wiki boards and other apps such as online polling apps, chat rooms, and digital social annotation programs such as Perusal to expand face-to-face students and online students' access to simulated classroom experiences and collaborative activities with peers. When considering the incorporation of technology in face-to-face classrooms beyond the pandemic moment, however, it seems important to revisit pedagogical concerns about teaching and learning in hybridized classroom environments, especially since many instructors still report that they feel ill-prepared to meet Shepard's call for pedagogy-driven teaching that incorporates innovative technologies. In this presentation, I expand Shepard's call for a revisitation of online teaching pedagogy to include the use of technology in face-to-face classrooms. And considering hybridity as a term used in higher education to identify classrooms that blend traditional classroom learning methods with online learning, I also considered a term that connotes a kind of entanglement between the analog, digital, or organic, inorganic, that demands recognition of its own challenges and intricacies. In thinking through hybridity, I extend Gillian Weiss's critique of seductive representations of technology in The Common Cyborg. In this creative essay in Disability Visibility, Weiss distinguishes disability perspectives on technology from mainstream notions of technology as transcendent of physical embodiment. Weiss's Cyborg provides important insights from first-person disability experiences that seem imperative for a hybrid pedagogy. Instructors of face-to-face classrooms considering hybridity need to consider more than the pragmatics of delivering technology. They need to carefully parse the seductive ideologies of technology or risk alienation of students that find that ideology inaccessible or problematic. As Weiss, whose writing is informed by her own personal experience with a computerized knee, acutely recognizes the glamorization of cyborg technology in films such as Marvel Studios' Iron Man series, and the fascination with artificial intelligence even if it's doomsday scrolling that overshadows and even sidelines the very real experiences and needs of disabled people who engage daily with technologies for survival and practical adaptation to a world ill-made for their inclusion. To combat the negative potential for hybridity to glamorize or sensationalize technology at the expense of accessibility and inclusivity, I proposed a teaching pedagogy that embraces hybridity in face-to-face classrooms, specifically in ways that center the disability perspectives of those in the disability community in discussions. By centering disability in classroom discussions, I hope to illuminate what Sharon L. Snyder, Brenda Jo Brueggemann, and Rosemary Garland Thompson identify as a quote gap in our quote collective unconsciousness that refuses to acknowledge quote the disabled body as the universal consequence of living an embodied life. And here I have that quote in full. Classroom readings and discussions that prioritize disability perspectives unsettle often unspoken beliefs about the binary between normative and non-normative bodies. Such activities assist students to interrogate the ableist cultural representations and assumptions they encounter and which inform their thinking in their everyday lives. In the time that I have today, I want to explore how the hybridization of face-to-face classrooms with hybrid teaching practices may lead students to more considerate understandings of disability and ableism across the spectrum of visible and invisible differences inside and beyond the classroom. My aim is to provide a framework for a hybridity pedagogy that incorporates disability perspectives in face-to-face classrooms. Due to the brief time I have, I will only touch on my students' experience of reading disability perspectives in a social annotation app. However, I am more than happy to discuss other hybrid experiences with Google Docs and polling apps in the Q&A. It is my hope that the discussion I do provide will be enough to suggest that incorporating disability perspectives and hybridity in the face-to-face classroom provides exponential benefits that transfer beyond the university. This is a new and developing project, and I welcome questions and suggestions for further research in the Q&A. I'm also happy to discuss my pedagogical applications of hybridity in the classroom in more detail at that time, and I've included these as an addendum in the longer paper I've posted in the resources for this talk. In opening the conversation about generating a more robust pedagogy for hybridity in face-to-face classrooms, especially by incorporating disability perspectives, it is foremost that I explore what I mean by disability. In exploring the connections between hybridity and disability, I draw from Rachel Adams, Benjamin Rice, and David Serlin's discussion of the term and keywords for disability studies, when they argue that, quote, the meanings we attribute to disability are shifting, elusive, and sometimes contradictory. Similarly, the meanings of hybridity lack specificity, elude even educators involved in negotiating the digital divide, and continue to shapeshift across the discourse communities of composition studies. Rather than trying to nail down a specific definition for disability, my pedagogical approach to incorporating hybridity into my disability studies themes classrooms has to do with de-hierarchizing the classroom and instead facilitating students' collaborative discussions and joint explorations of disability as a term and a discourse that varies across discourse communities. Or, as Adams, Rice, and Serlin recognize, quote, disability encompasses a broad range of bodily, cognitive, and sensory differences and capacities. In Mad at School, Margaret Price advises the category of disability becomes even more problematic when thinking of mental illness. Price argues that since the mind is never actually separate from the body, more intersections exist than are recognized by the current tendency to dichotomize disability into, quote, healthy and unhealthy subcategories. The mutability of disability in conjunction with hybridity offers productive opportunities for students to come to understand how categories form in response to dominant social perspectives and prejudices. Thus, through their own collaborative discussions of reading, students begin to understand how ableism has necessitated the term disability. Centering disability perspectives tempers students' understanding of the social gains and inherent dangers of digital technologies. Over the past year, I have taught 4 sections of English Composition 2 with a disability studies theme. I have to admit, I was not prepared for the profound connections my students would gain from Weiss's essay. I had assigned the essay because it provided a first-person disability perspective, and I paired it with Nicholas Carr's Is Google Making Us Stupid? And Sherry Turkle's How Computers Change the Way We Think. At the time, I imagined that Weiss's piece would help students to explore the connection between technology and embodiment. The reading, however, far exceeded my expectations. Their enthusiastic engagement with Weiss's ideas through the social annotation app Perusal led to deeper classroom discussions about such issues as luxury prosthetic technologies, prosthetic access as a marker for economic class, the positive and negative ramifications of social media for people with disabilities, and the prohibitive cost of advanced technologies for many people, though not all, with disabilities. Weiss's essay ignited students' interest in the way that disability opens new perspectives on popular issues, including AI technologies. As an educator, I recognize this as a key moment in our classes where students gained confidence in discussions and even found their call to write. Perhaps this is because thinking about and through disability challenges students' critical thinking skills. Critical thinking is a key acquisition skill in the composition classroom, and one which disability scholars such as Price recognize. Or as Price posits, quote, when we write, we align ourselves with particular worldviews. We step into and out of subject positions. We signal our alliances and our enmities. And I have this quote here in larger context. As I guided student discussions about the seductive ideologies of technology discussed by Weiss, I increasingly found students reflected on their own assumptions about disability. These discussions frequently led to students exploring their own unacknowledged ableism. Reading and discussion of first-person disability perspectives, such as Ellen Samuels' 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time and Audre Lorde's Cancer Journals, further promoted students' self-reflection and encouraged them to interrogate the assumptions that they had about a wide range of issues, including disability, accessibility, the social contract, technology and writing, and it pressed students to consider how their own assumptions, worldview, identities, and personal ideologies influence their writing. Thus, my inclusion of disability with the parentheses around dis as a modality for critical inquiry assisted students to cross a key threshold in their writing journey. In the reading of Weiss's essay, students moved from binary thinking of the pros and cons of internet technology to more considerate recognition of the matrix of complexities posed by new technologies. In imagining this passage, I draw from Linda Adler-Kastner and Elizabeth Wardle's discussion of threshold concepts. In Naming What We Know, Threshold Concepts in Writing Studies. In it, Adler-Kastner and Wardle expand J.F. Meyer and Ray Land's theory of threshold concepts as, quote, ideas that learners must, quote, see through and with. As they explain further, quote, threshold concepts are more than core or foundational. They are ideas, ways of seeing, ways of understanding that change a learner's stance, view, or behavior. By discussing what it means to be able-bodied, students begin to unravel the relationship between disability and ableism that had hitherto shaped their collective understanding of the term disability. This had broad implications for their journey as writers as well, as they began to see the bumps and jostling of their own writing through a very different lens. Students read and discussed Ellen Samuels' 6 Ways of Looking at Crip Time, and their concept of the experience of timing shaped by our various experiences of embodiment and the interactions of that embodiment in societies either designed in accord with our body minds or not. Many students in my class reconsidered their experiences of writing from a continuum of failure to success to imagining that at times frustrating experiences of writer's block, stalled ideas, or disorganized reasoning in writing as informative and productive expressions of embodied experience of composition. Students began to recognize how their internalized ableism impacts their writing journey and shapes their conception of themselves as writers and researchers. This is important work, for as Fiona Kamari Campbell finds, quote, a disability studies critique of ableism takes the focus from disability as a self-contained designation. Such discussions of ableism can assist students to consider more concretely how academia has been structured to exclude many people with disabilities and how this experience peeks through in their own writing. Further, as J. Timothy Dolmush has asserted, meritocracy in academia actually does much of the work of, quote, building disability. By interrogating the category of disability, students probe their own ableist assumptions, their privilege within academia, and become more receptive to disability perspectives as unrecognized repositories of knowledge and understanding. This translates further to their willingness to listen and value diverse experiences within their own classroom community. Discussions centered on disability themes quicken students' understanding of the rhetorical situation, audience, and purpose of writing. This approach to the composition classroom has the capacity to reinvigorate discussions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Scholars such as Cynthia Lewicki Wilson and Brenda Jo Brueggemann have long advocated for, quote, the centrality of disability issues in composition classrooms. Lewicki Wilson and Brueggemann argue that, quote, close attention to disability discourses sharpens critical thinking and improves literacy for everyone. To Lewicki Wilson and Brueggemann's advocacy of the suitability of disability perspectives for composition classrooms, I add the benefits of hybridity and exploring the ideologies of technology with students. For, as Weiss so eloquently argues, the cyborg experience of people with disabilities serves as a touchstone for pedagogical conversations that probe the utility of technological hybridity, and I enthusiastically agree. By conscientiously pairing hybridity with first-person disability perspectives in face-to-face classrooms, educators can open possibilities for productive discussions of the ethical implementation of technology as a prosthetic that ameliorates society's deficiencies rather than a tool for transcending those of the individual. If I had more time today, I would share more of the hybrid activities that I incorporated in my disability studies themed English Comp 2 courses and more about students' responses to this pedagogical approach. It is my hope, however, that this brief presentation gives you something to consider about the potential positive benefits for hybridity paired with disability studies in face-to-face classrooms. Thank you for your time today.